All right, today's Halloween. So it's all about masks, it's all about being different people, showing up as alter egos. And I just want to offer two things in this. As a Black woman in corporate, I'm just going to say this. I currently, well, I guess in all my jobs, I've always been external facing. And what I mean by that is and all my corporate jobs, when I worked for the government, when I worked for the New York City Department of Education, my job was to go to different schools and support their programs. So whether that was curriculum writing, funding, whatever. So I was going to schools, right? So it was external facing. And because of that, I saw a lot of things and I work with a lot of different people. Now, obviously, working in the New York City Department of Education and going to public schools in New York City, lots of diversity there. Um, so we can get into the race stuff, but for the most part, lots of diversity where I landed. Then I moved over to EdTech, where I did a number of different jobs, but my last two roles were to support HR teams and people managers in hiring people. My job was to make sure that they had good questions when they were hiring, that they all had the same thing so we could reduce bias in the way that you hired. And for the most part, I will say it was kind of diverse. So I do think HR teams and people teams do tend to have a lot of different types of people in there. But then when you start going, when I was working with people managers, depending on what I was doing, whether I was in sales, lots of white men. If I was in engineering, lots of Asian men. Like it kind of you sort of seeing that breakdown. In my current role, I work with every team imaginable. As long as and for the most part, it's Fortune 100 companies, but I work with every single team. And 9 out of 10 times, I'm like the only Black person in the room. And it's so interesting to me. And I want to say several things about that. One, when we hear people like Beyonce, right? Beyonce for a while was like Sasha Fierce, and she had this alter ego, and that's how she operated in the world. And we have, and I'm this is off the cuffs. I didn't prep for this, so I'm blanking on other people right now. But so many times we see this in media, especially in superhero movies, where for the person to be the hero, they need to put on a new persona, right? And so many times I feel like as a Black woman in the workspace, I sometimes I wish that I legitimately had a new persona. One of my coworkers, Black man, Black gay man, he would switch his name every time he switched companies. So he would either go by his first name or his last name. So if his name was like John Adam, like at this company, I would know him as John. The next company, he would go as Adam, right? And he was just kind of like, depending on where he switches, he puts on a new persona, right? And that enabled him to navigate the different spaces that he was in and whatever he was trying to do in that moment, which I'm like, yeah, that's fair. That's cool. I think as a Black woman, like we need to walk into spaces and put on these different personas in order to thrive. And this whole idea of like pets to threat, where you come in and everyone loves you and your ideas and yada yada yada. But then as you start being more confident, as you let go of this idea of imposter syndrome, all this stuff that doesn't serve you but serves other people, once you start putting on like, yeah, I'm that girl, yeah, I did this, then you start becoming a threat, right? And then it's like, okay, do I need to shrink myself? Do I need to hide myself? So it's this idea of constant masking that needs to happen in order to be successful, which can be really, really frustrating. So it's just like, do you show up as a totally different person in the workspace and then show up um, differently in your personal life or in other spaces? So hopefully that was clear. That was just an extended train of thought. And then my second thing is really about being neurospicy. So I was diagnosed with ADHD in 2021 or 2022. It was maybe 2022 because of the pandemic, spent a lot of time working remotely. And then as the pandemic started easing up and people were having back to office mandates, I went back to the office and it was such a struggle for me being in the office. And I was like, why is this so hard? I can't concentrate. I'm easily irritated. All of this, right? Um, And I was usually just kind of like, oh, I'm quiet, I'm an introvert, I'm this, you know. But like really returning back to the world after the pandemic exposed a lot of my sensitivity to me because the constant movement, the noise, it was too much. I didn't like people who were super loud. It just became too much for me to focus, right? And again, it just brought back to me what happens when you spend years performing professional just to survive at work. And I was struggling, right? And there's an article that Dr. Essence Rivers says that she says Black girls are often punished for the very traits that signal ADHD, which is the type of energy you have, curiosity, talkativeness. So you learn early to suppress. And I know for me, in my adulthood and the way I function, especially in very white spaces, is I feel like my tone is like over monitored, right? So like I will have a coworker being like, "Oh, why did you say that way?" or "Your face this or that," where it's like someone else can say something very similar and no one is mentioning their facial expressions, no one is mentioning their body language, no one's mentioning their tone, but I say it and then it becomes like a challenge, right? And I'm a very like I do have a tune, I'm not gonna hold you, but like for the most part, like I'm very like calm, especially in the workplace, just because I'm aware of the space that I'm in. So for you to call me out on any facial features or anything or expression, like I remember once my manager was just kind of like gave me all this negative feedback because on our meeting 55 minutes of it was just straight negative feedback, and when she was done she's like, what are your thoughts? And I was like, well, I'll take that in and then I will process it and we can have another conversation later. And she was just like, "Well, that was very rude of you, and I expected I was like, "How would you want me to react after all this negative feedback? I don't, I don't get it." So stuff like that is just like you're constantly being monitored and policed in the way that you express yourself. And I think for me that led to either over explaining or staying silent to avoid being labeled as aggressive, right? So either I talk a lot. I'm always like trying to make sure people understand what I'm saying and I don't get misconstrued, or I'm silent because I'm like, before I show up, I need to be perfect, right? And either way is not good, especially in the workplace, because you're rewarded for pushing back and speaking up. But what if because of your race, gender, etc., doing the things that people usually rewarded for, you're punished for? So it's always just like a constant conversation in my head of like, where do I lean in this? And then when you add neurospicy, when you add ADHD to it, it's just really difficult, right? And then become the hyper competent fixer who can't show fatigue. So like in my old role, again, like, oh my gosh, everything that was a problem, I fixed. And like I created all these processes and it was always like, oh my God, this is so great. But then I was never rewarded for it, right? And my ADHD allows me to hyper fixate on a problem and find a solution. And I'm very curious. I'm asking questions so I can find the root of the problem. However, if then that becomes like, oh my gosh, she's such a superhero, right? Then what do you do with that? And I think it's so challenging to be a Black woman with ADHD because you already get labeled with all these superhero stuff, and then you're super competent, so it even doubles more. Um, so it's just like a double performance, double consciousness. It's just a lot, right? that you're always navigating, which is just exhausting. Being misunderstood is exhausting and it compounds in your fatigue, right? Um, and I think it's important to notice, right? And I think for me, I noticed it the most when especially after the pandemic, and I realized that it wasn't just me trying to navigate racism and sexism in the workplace. It was also me trying to navigate ADHD and neurospiciness because during the pandemic I didn't have to mask, and then I had to like remask in the office, right? So I went from having a quiet home, having a space to think and to breathe, and to have my hair out and all this stuff and just be comfortable in who I was and what I was doing and able to come in and out of like my thought process to an open floor office where I had to be conscious of the clothes I was wearing. And I don't know, like everyone on the spectrum is like different, right? So for me, like it's a lot to have my hair tied back like that stresses me out. And like if I'm in the office, like depending on what hairstyle I had, I would probably just pull it back just so I wouldn't be get asked random questions. Or if you're wearing like jeans and it's like tight versus wearing something flowy, if you're wearing a bra, like all this stuff is sensory and it impacts you, or at least impacted me. And then going back in the office definitely it was something I was always aware of, and then also just the noise of it all was a lot. The constant chatter, the people walking by, the phone pings, and then you also have to, like, you can't ignore everyone. Like, you have to, like, smile, and you have to have small talk, and so you're constantly being distracted, so all of that. Um, and then you just kind of like end up forcing focus, and then you have to, like, also, like, know all the scripts you're supposed to say, because work, not even work, but society at large, especially if it's not a place you're comfortable in, is theater. So you have to remember all the scripts, so you fit in and you're not, an outcast, right? So it's just a lot. And I don't know if anyone's experienced this, but I do want to share, like, on this Hallows Eve, masking, unmasking in the workplace, being a Black woman, being ADHD, can be a lot, right? Um, and it's weird because moments of brilliance, or for me, or when my brain connects things fast. I have bursts of insights, creativity, um, and I couldn't really do that. I can't do that when I'm surrounded by people all the time. So I realized that the environment was impacting me more than I care to admit, and that's when went and got an ADHD diagnosis, right? So I did take meds for a while, but then I stopped, and for the most part, I'm fine, especially if I'm working from home or a quiet space. It is just I really need so much help when I'm in an office setting. So that's that. Um, so yeah. And I just want to bring in some data. So Dr. Rivers says that Black girls are 3 times more likely to be disciplined than white girls for subjective behavior. And in that workplace, that looks like microaggressions, like, oh, you're so intense, or you overthink things, right? Or pressure to conform to whatever society you're in, right? It's a structural misfailure. It's not a personal misfailure. And that's kind of why I want to share this, because I think after the pandemic, so many people have had to unmask, right? And it feels like a personal failure, and it's not, right? Self-care doesn't fix systemic issues. Like, and depending on where you are and what you need, like, maybe you're taking um medicine to support you, maybe you're not, maybe you're working out, maybe you're changing your diet. And there's so many things to do, but I also want to offer to you that it's really important to also just find a work environment that works for you and your brain, right? Um, so I would say focus on strengths, like, when you're looking for your job. And that's why when people come to me, my first thing isn't always, oh, go to this job. I really want to understand, like, what is your special, unique mix? And then how do we find a job that aligns with that? That's, like, really, really important to me, because I want to make sure that wherever you go, wherever you land, it's a place that's healthy for you and your brain. So ADHD has so many great strategic advantages, like the rapid synthesis, the hyper focus on passions, the intuitive pattern spotting. Like, it is why I'm so good at my job. But I also have to understand that for me to be good at my job, I also need certain things to work for me, right? So I also know I have to, like, design systems that work for me. So, like, that is, like, I batch a lot of my task, noise canceling rituals. I make sure that I'm more focused in the mornings. I try to get all my work done then. And then for meetings, now that we have AI, recording stuff, note takers, all that is really, really helpful. Okay. I want to add that Black women aren't always told that you can ask for accommodations. It's like a scarlet letter, if you will. But requesting the right setup isn't weakness. It's more of wisdom, right? It helps you get your job done better, and to the degree that you know you can, right? And what you need and what the company needs, right? So I just want to say that, right? So I hope this is helpful, to folks. And whatever you need, I hope you ask. So you're not stewing in this, you're not confused by yourself, you're not angry, you're not lonely, you're not building up the fatigue and the burden. Um, and I think you can do that through finding community. You can get a therapist, you can get a coach. It's really, really important to find someone who's at the intersection of race, gender, and neurodivergence, because that allows you to hopefully be relatable without having to explain yourself all the time. And that doesn't always mean that that person's the perfect person for you, but at least in my experience, for certain things, it's helpful when I'm trying to explain the race of it all, the gender of it all, the class of it all, the neurodivergence of it all. It's helpful to have someone who's been there, done that. So, like I said, it's Halloween. The hardest mask to take off isn't for a costume. It's the one you've worn for survival, to get through this thing that we call the American dream. And that's a whole nother conversation, right? But I just want to offer that unmasking isn't reckless. It is coming back to yourself, right? So for every Black woman who's ever felt so felt too much, too distracted, too all over the place, too multi-hyphenate, too whatever the case might be. Like that's your brilliance. And I want to support you in finding a system, finding a space that supports that brilliance and pays your bills, right? Embrace your uniqueness. Stop striving for perfection and live in alignment. I'm all about alignment. So let's do that. All right. Thank you so much for watching. I also want to say this is 31 videos straight. So talk about hyperfixation and how it helps you in the goals that you want to achieve. All right. Bye.